We are live. It is the Prospect Weekly Roundup. I am David Dayen, executive editor of the American Prospect. Good to see you today. And with me today, we have Maureen Tkacik. Mo, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Go Birds.
Go Birds. That's right. You got the Kelly Green on. You're ready to go.
Oh
Eagles.
yeah.
We are both Philadelphians or have connections to Philadelphia, and so we're excited about the Super Bowl. We're excited about nothing else that's going on in the world, but the Super Bowl, absolutely. Where
Literally.
Trump will be in
Oh,
attendance, apparently, as I'm told. So maybe that will constrain. I don't. How many more shots of Taylor Swift vis-a-vis Trump will we have? That'll be an interesting thing to look at. But I wanted to start with a little breaking news, something I just put on the site at prospect.org that I wanted to talk about. And then we're going to talk about some of Mo's great pieces this week, great investigations on the site. But here's what we got. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is right now essentially in a state of limbo. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, has been named the acting director of the Bureau. That was on, I believe, Monday when he was named that. And when he was named that on Monday, he immediately sent an email to everyone at the CFPB that stopped most activity at the agency. It said you can't do litigation, you can't do any more settlements or rule writing, or even public communications with research or guidance or anything. So he sends that email on Monday. And then on Tuesday, he sends an update to the Monday email. And the reason is that he was asked, because there was no mention of it, what about our supervisory authority? Supervision authority for banks and other entities is a big part of what CFPB does. They do examinations, they ask for documents, and they can do this with banks, and they can also do it with non-banks who are large participants in various financial services. So they're like, well, what do we do with supervision? So Bessent sends an update because Bessent apparently knows nothing about the CFPB. So he sends this update, and the update says on supervision, you're not allowed to designate any non-banks to be supervised. And that sounds a little, what does that mean? It's a little obscure. This is a gift to big tech. Let me explain why. So last November, CFPB finalized a rule that put payment apps under federal supervision by the CFPB. Payment apps like peer-to-peer apps where you can, Venmo and things like that, where you can pay somebody from one member to another. But the way that it works is they write the rule and then they have to designate each entity as subject to supervision under the rule. So that's how the larger participant process works. In December, they designated Google and Google Pay as subject to supervision for under its payment app rule. But not everybody else has been put under there, including a bunch of tech firms. And the biggest tech firm that has not been designated under this rule is X, which
the
is
everything app.
the everything app, right? They just just late last month signed a deal with Visa to support a real-time payment tool where X users can give money to other X users through the app. So this, Besant forgot about supervision. And when he gets around to it, he does something that is a total gift to big tech and particularly to Elon Musk. So we just posted that. That's at prospect.org. There's some other weirdness going on at CFPB. Apparently, three of the Doge kids showed up in the employee directory out of nowhere. And my understanding is that they're in the office now. So we have this continued, and now maybe Mo, we can get into what you were discussing this week. We have this continued kind of break-in, this series of break-ins into federal agencies to look at their IT systems and do various tasks and techniques affiliated with the Doge guys. And you wrote this week about the particular process that's being done through Treasury with that. Treasury's payment system supports 88% of all federal payments, about $5.5 trillion in payments that go out every day, 4 million payments a day, something like 1.4 billion payments a year. And Doge has wanted, Musk and his team has wanted control of this for some reason. I mean, what reporting has shown now is that they've wanted to be able to, at the level of Treasury, cancel payments they don't like, or pause payments that they don't like, particularly from the U.S. Agency for International Development. So, the use of the plumbing of the financial payment system of the U.S. government as a tool for the executive branch to make decisions on spending is really, really radical, illegal, dangerous, because if they put in a bunch of code that screws up the whole payment system, then we're in for a bigger problem. It's a real mess. And you wrote about some of the individuals involved with that, particularly the sort of lead individual involved with that, a guy named Tom Krauss. So tell us about Tom Krauss.
So Tom Krauss, I'd never heard the name before, but he was the CEO. He is the CEO of a company called Cloud Software Group,
Yeah.
but it's Citrix, which is a sort of telecommuting, remote work enablement enterprise software company. Um, I wouldn't think about Citrix much because I use the freeware. Um, but uh, but a couple years ago, Citrix was uh, the worst deal of the kind of post-COVID bubble. After COVID, when interest rates plunged, almost to below zero, when the Federal Reserve was basically willing to buy any investment grade, not only bonds but CDOs, which can pile together a lot of junk bonds. The bond market just went crazy, and every company
Hmm.
issued enormous amounts of debt. I remember Boeing issued something like $25 billion in debt during this time. This is why Boeing is not in bankruptcy court right now. Um, but Citrix, and then of course private equity gets involved, and private equity, a few private equity firms, namely Thoma Bravo and Vista Equity Partners in Texas, sort of started rolling up software companies, enterprise software companies, and yeah, the grifter story. It will tell you the story, and moving them to software as a service model, subscription models. So, at that point, every kind of piece of necessary, annoying software that every office was using that they can't live without, just ballooned in price. So this was this really popular business model, and Vista Equity Partners and another private equity firm decided that the bond market was so ripe for rating, and this was such a profitable business model that they were going to make a $16.5 billion offer for this company, Citrix, which has only, at the time, $3 billion in revenue. Um, and they're going to finance it almost entirely in debt. Which
Yeah.
is crazy, right? Because
Yeah.
when you issue debt, you have to make interest payments on that debt. And the software companies that they were rolling together, they had a combined EBITDA of $1 billion. How do you service $15 billion in debt on on $1 billion in EBITDA? Well, you don't, and they didn't have enough money to make their first interest payment. And it was this complete disaster because it was this enormous bond issuance. There were $735 million in fees collected just by the underwriters alone. And they couldn't sell, they couldn't place the bonds because the
Hmm.
interest rates in 2022, obviously interest rates were, rising every month. And so they had to do a lot of funny business to get these bonds even placed to begin with. But I was thinking the whole time, like, how does this company not immediately file for bankruptcy? And a lot of distressed debt watchers were thinking the same thing. How is this going to work? Who is going to, like, you can't, at a certain point, you can't cut enough costs to actually make the economics here work. Well, they figured something out. They, restructured some of the debt on the side here or whatever. But the guy that they hired to make the numbers work was this, interesting, elusive figure, Tom Krauss. Tom Krauss had been at Broadcom, where he'd done a lot of the same. He'd purchased a
Yeah.
lot of software companies and then moved them to subscription models, jacked up the price, laid off a bunch of people. So he had a track record. And within the software industry, within the IT industry, this was just like, like Vlad the Impaler was coming for their company, and
Right.
there was a lot of love for Citrix, which I think had good customer service, had a reputation for that prior to this operation. Well,
Yeah.
Vlad Krauss the Impaler came in and just did brutal layoffs. He stopped paying bills. Right, I found a lawsuit in Broward County where Citrix is based. From a company that hilariously made Citrix branded Pride merchandise.
Right.
And
Right.
he cut off this company immediately. They ran a little online store for employees who love Citrix so much they wanted to buy, their
Mugs and hats and
company
stuff. Yeah.
hoodies and stuff
Right.
like that. And he cut them off and left them with $500,000 in inventory and refused to
Right.
pay for it. And there's a lot of other is, you know, uh, lawsuits in the system that that show that this was a very concerted operation, and that's when it started is fall 2022. Citrix just stopped paying their bills. One thing that's interesting is that I've never seen this before in these lawsuits that these vendors of Citrix were filing for not getting paid. Um, Everything's redacted. There's one that's
Mm.
filed in Palo Alto, um, and the entire thing is redacted. So clearly, Citrix, they had something going on where they understood that they were going to keep this under wraps.
Yeah.
I
Okay. Okay.
so
So just to be broad here. So I believe we have this in the chat right now. There's a story that Mo did 2 years ago about Citrix. It's called Griftrix. And we posted that over in the chat so that you can see sort of the rundown of why this company got into all this trouble. But so Krauss is brought in as this private equity hatchet man, and he's undergoing the same or very similar techniques that Musk did when he got a hold of Twitter, right? I mean, firing workers, terminating leases, terminating contracts that he had, and stiffing vendors. All of that is part of the playbook here. And now it seems like that playbook is being brought to Washington. So when Musk brings in a bunch of young guns to be his sort of soldiers for the cause here. Krauss comes along with him, and he's not of the same age. I mean, he's an older guy, but he has this experience of basically being a hatchet man, right?
Yeah, I think he's 46. And, I think that, like, I think it was just really interesting to see that he was involved because he was very deeply involved. Also, is it Daniel Katz, Scott Bessent's chief of staff, even
Yeah.
before Bessent was nominated, actually before, right after the election, is when Bessent's staff began to start kind of pushing Treasury officials for some information about their systems, how to get into the payment systems,
Right.
and they sort of got rebuffed. And what is this? Who is this guy? Um, and um, and Katz, as soon as Besant was confirmed,
Right.
that's when the pressure really gets applied immediately.
Right.
The
So
acting
there's this
Treasury
guy.
Secretary.
Yeah, there's this guy. The acting secretary is this guy, Stephen Lebrick, and he's asked 4 days after the uh, inauguration by Krauss, can we have access to the Treasury's payment system so that we can cut off all U.S. aid loans and grants? And Lebrick says, well,
Right.
no, you can't do that. It's very highly classified. We don't want to mess with the plumbing. You could maybe just talk to AID or talk to the State Department. And if they want to deal with those payments, then we won't pay them out. But you can't do that inside Treasury. And because there would be legal issues. And what, in a chilling way, what Krauss says back to Lebrick is that you're legally viable too. You're going to be legally
Right. He
viable if you
says
don't
so.
give us
So
this data. Go ahead.
David Lebrick says to, Kraus, no, like for personal liability matters, this just
Yeah,
this can't be done essentially. And he says, good grief. Um,
yeah.
I would
Krauss
also
says
recommend
back.
you consider an equal. Yeah, Kraus says, I would also recommend you consider an equal alternative liability, which
Right,
is, I guess, your job, and you're going to be blacklisted, and obviously you're an ideological enemy of Doge, um, whatever the case is. But that's the kind of guy that we're dealing with.
right. And
And
then
when
and
this
then what happens
operation,
is,
sorry,
yeah, just to continue this through, what happens is that Bissent then becomes confirmed as Treasury
Mhm.
Secretary, and within a couple days, Lebrick is put on administrative leave, and he eventually retires. And now what we've learned today is that Krauss has been given Lebrick's job. So Krauss is now the head of the Bureau of the Fiscal Service. He is the assistant treasury secretary for finance or something. I forget the exact title. And he is in charge. He is the only person with access to the payment system that is a liaison with Doge. There was another guy, Marco Eliz, but he quit yesterday because they found a bunch of racist posts of his. But there was a court order around this access to the payment system. A bunch of unions and some others tried to sue, saying this was a Privacy Act violation to have people outside of Treasury accessing this database. And as a result of that order, they gave only two people access, and one of them was Tom Krauss. And so Tom Krauss now is the only one who has access to this. He's not a software engineer. He's not a code writer. The other guy, Marco Eliz, was. But presumably, now that he's a Treasury official, he can maybe hire and designate someone to do the work that it looks like Doge wants to do, which is get access to the ability to pause or cancel or do something to spending that they don't like.
and he has not quit cloud software. The
Yeah,
employees of the company had no idea that he was taking on um, this new title. Supposedly, a few months ago, he gave a stern all hands town hall, talking about how disloyal it would be, for them to moonlight or to have have two jobs, because
right.
this is another thing that he had. He imposed his own return to the office
Yeah, right.
edict a, a couple of years ago, maybe, or late mid to
Yeah.
2023, and he had to sort of give it up really quickly because they didn't have that many offices, and then he realized he doesn't want to actually pay for the offices. So there's a lot of Citrix,
Well, and then the fact that Citrix is a tool for remote work. And he's
right.
saying that everybody at Citrix has to come back to the office. It's just a completely
And
weird,
they had a
contradictory
whole
ruling.
department. I mean, I'm sure that they've this department. But they had Citrix used to generate a whole lot of research about how fully remote workers were actually more engaged in the workplace and more
Right.
motivated, more productive.
Because it was core to their business model. They
Right,
had to
yeah.
make it look like remote work was great.
Of course, these return to the office mandates are always just sort of, attrition devices. But yeah, so he had sent an email to all of the employees, sort of praising Elon Musk around the inauguration. So that was the only clue that he gave anyone that he might be involved at Citrix involved in this operation.
Yeah.
But it one thing that's very strange about it to me is that he wasn't initially identified as a Treasury official or anyone, as
Right.
working at Treasury. He was identified as a Doge liaison. So it's not really clear, there's a lot of things about this operation that do seem deliberate. I think that
And
it was,
wasn't he termed a special government employee, which is a very specific
yes,
designation? And one thing that that designation does is that you don't have to file financial disclosures, you don't have to comply with divesting or anything like that. And obviously, someone who's the CEO of a Silicon Valley company is going to want that kind of designation if he's going into the government. So he did that. But now that he has been named the head of the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, it seems like he's not a special government employee, because special government employees can only work for 130 days out of a calendar year. It was initially an SGE designation is for people who sit on advisory boards and who just are part-time, giving recommendations or advice. But now it seems like they've made this special government employee a permanent Treasury staffer, just to get around some of these other rules.
right. And, again, I don't know how they're working this. Obviously, Citrix is a private company now, so it's unclear, what his compensation package is or where it was even coming from, because it was probably coming in part, at least, from Vista, equity partners, and
Yeah.
some of the other hedge funds and private equity firms involved in this deal. But how is this legal? When
Right.
you start to wonder, and it's just because it was so clearly, a very, um, deliberately plotted operation. And I think that it was politically very savvy to start with USAID, which is something that, outside Washington, um, nobody knows about or cares about. And if they did know
Right.
about it, they probably wouldn't love it.
Yeah, and I
And
mean, I've seen people like David Axelrod say, "Well, when you talk to voters, they hate foreign aid, and so you can't defend foreign aid because voters think there's too much of it, et cetera." But this is really, I think, an example of first they came for USAID, and I said nothing, and now we're seeing the same folks come for the Department of Education, the Department of Labor, CFPB, as I just mentioned. It's not going to stop with USAID, right?
right.
Yeah,
But, obviously the Democrats have a credibility problem when they talk about Trump and coups, and this is, obviously you and I think probably agree that this is so much scarier than January 6th ever was.
yeah.
Um, I personally think that, yesterday Pam Bundy disbanded some, you know, uh,
She's
corruption,
the
some
new
global
new attorney
corruption
general.
task
Yeah.
force that
Yeah.
had been started by, Lisa Monaco. Well,
Yeah.
great job on that. The Ralph
Right.
De La Torre, he's been
Yeah.
under investigation for a year now, and what, like,
They haven't done
I
anything.
it hasn't been outside of antitrust. The Biden administration was not had a
Correct.
terrible record with going after corporate crime and anything involving rich guys, and but they did prosecute 1,500 conspirators in January 6th, and I mean, I'm sorry, like, it's a zero sum game. That's a waste of resources in my book, and it makes it much more difficult for the Democrats Um, I think to convey how terrifying this is. Now, again, it's just and
Well,
again, and I think that
I mean, let
yeah,
me
I
say
think, but
this. Let me say this. I mean, it's a multi-front war. I don't necessarily disagree with you that that the Justice Department outside of antitrust was disappointing, especially with respect to corporate crime. What Bondi said in her very first, Bondi is the new Attorney General, former Florida Attorney General, and what she said in her very first indication, her first memo at the Justice Department, effectively was that the men and women of the Justice Department, are essentially counsels to President Trump. I mean, she said that, you have to zealously guard the interests of the United States, and the interests of the United States are anything that Donald Trump says they are. So, I mean, that's a very dangerous move. And with respect to Treasury, mucking around with the payments that for decades have gone out 100%, your mom's Social Security check, grandmother's Social Security check, your Medicare payments, Medicaid payments to the states, the primary stuff that the U.S. government pays for, all of that has gone through 100%, never, always on time and never late. And the fact that we're getting these guys plugging in pieces of code, maybe to insert AI into the mix to designate, to identify certain payments and flag them maybe for, something, wrong think. I don't know exactly what they'd be flagged for. It's just a very terrifying is the right word for it. Terrifying situation. I talked to Nathan Tankus earlier this week, and that was exactly the term that he used.
and another thing is that, like, regardless of who you want to listen to, right? Like, regardless of how effective or not the Biden administration was at managing the state, which I would say it's been a while since anyone's been particularly effective in that
Yeah,
regard.
that's
Um,
true.
you know, is there a group of people more aware, concerned, and of about fraud and waste in the government than the inspectors general, right? If they wanted to legitimately, sincerely cut down on government waste, those would be the first people that you would interview,
Yeah,
right? Because these are government lifers. They are, it's hard to imagine that there are still sort of nonpartisan, loyalists to America, but they do exist in DC. They're, usually a little
yeah.
bit older. There are some people with integrity in Washington, and I'll tell you, the ones who don't become lobbyists, who don't become propagandists, like, they're good eggs. They're a little bit naive, in a lot of cases, but the inspectors general are not. They know a lot about
Right.
who is defrauding the government because they have watched it happen, and they've investigated, whistleblower complaints, and usually they get railroaded, and usually inspectors general, a lot of the times
They're
their
unheated.
reports amount to nothing,
Exactly.
but they
Yeah.
know,
I
those
mean,
guys know.
I think it's a lot like if you think about authoritarian governments that come in, what are the first things that they do? They shoot the communications towers, right? They
Mhm.
don't want the information to get out. So what is the first thing that Donald Trump does? He fires the inspectors general, the people who know where the bodies are buried, the people who know where the fraud and abuse is in government. And now he's taking over the IT systems, which has all of this information that can be put to use, whether it's personnel information that can be used to help fire workers, or sensitive data that can be used to stop payments or delay payments or whatever. I mean, I think it's a very classic kind of strategy, don't you?
It's an extremely classic strategy, right? And usually they take over the radio towers. They already have X, and I'll say that
Exactly.
Krauss's name is obviously on a list because it was difficult to get traction. I had to, like, kind of send my story to everybody that I knew yesterday, but a comment that I wrote on some random post about how, Jason Kelsey and Kylie Kelsey will be cheering for the Eagles, but their kids won't, during the Super Bowl. And somebody else commented that, it's sad that Jason and Kylie have to root for the Eagles when clearly they, would are rooting for their, family. And I wrote, I commented, I was like, are you fucking kidding? Like, what are you smoking that you think Kylie Kelsey is rooting for against the Eagles, like at the Super Bowl? Are you, like, and like that got like 100 likes, like immediately. And this is a comment on a comment,
Right.
go birds. But it really highlighted it. It took a long time for the post the story on Krauss to get any traction. And I looked up Krauss, nothing, no post on X mentioning his name has like more than not 98 likes, and so it's kind of
I
it's
can tell you the
so
story did well, and it did get traction. Like,
it did get oh no, it did. And I think that, like, there are other social media
yeah,
platforms that I'm really, really slow. I'm the latest adopter that exists. So, I
Blue
haven't yet
Sky
to
is
join
a
y'all.
thing. By the way, Prospect's there on the Prospect is well in hand on Blue Sky. If you want to go over there, the prospect.bluesky.social. But um, here's the thing. Yeah. So, I mean, I struggle with nailing down exactly what they're doing with all these IT systems. I mean, obviously, what they're doing with the payment system, we have some evidence there that they wanted to use that to pause or cancel payments. But, when you're talking about personnel files, like, is that sort of a version of compromising information that they want to get? Is it just to feed the X propaganda machine? Hey, look what I found in the Department of Labor files, or look what I found over here. Is it just the Twitter files magnified by every federal agency that we're just going to see over and over again? Those are the kind of questions that I have, because this was very calculated. They turned, Doge was originally going to be an outside advisory group that had no connection to the federal government. And then on January 20th, it has this executive order that says Doge is now the U.S. Digital Service, which was this entity started by Obama after healthcare.gov debacle to improve the federal government's information technology, right? And it says right in there that in the executive order, though that that's not really the law, but it says in the executive order, this entity will have access to IT systems across the federal government. So it was very deliberate what they're doing, and very calculated. But the question that I have is, to what end? And I'm wondering what you think about that.
Um, I mean, like, yes, I think it's to, I mean, the first, I think that the USAID, starting with them, um, again, it was like politically masterful. USAID is doing all kinds of things that, 90% of Americans probably don't, want their taxpayer money to go to. And I'm not talking about, like, foreign aid, like, if it was grants to the World Food Program, like that, you know, that would be one thing. But basically what they're trying to find is anything that can sound, like condoms for Gaza, right?
Right. I
And
mean, it's so funny because, like, for 20 years, John McCain would put out things like, "Here's a funny sounding name program, and let's all fearmonger over that." This is just the same thing. It's like the same thing over and over again, where they find one program worth $100,000 that is putting on a DI musical in Ireland or something, like some ridiculous sounding thing, and they use that to stand in for the federal government. Meanwhile, if you want to look for fraud and
right,
abuse in
it's
the
absolutely
system,
not.
why don't you look at Medicare Advantage? Like, I mean, there are plenty of things to look at if you want to go for them and find them that actually mean something, rather than some rounding error in the federal budget.
But nothing, like, there's never been any good faith from these people. I mean, fundamentally,
Yeah.
they are
Yeah.
self-interested, lying, psychotic oligarchs, using, like cult member stooges to carry out these orders. It's it is very much like, there's there's no there's no sincerity here. And yes, they're trying to cut off payments. I mean, again, this Treasury thing was discovered the week after they,
Yeah.
announced their giant payments pause. Well, that's what they want to do. They want to just hit pause on all the payments. Now, Trump has told somebody to take, keep their hands off of Social Security and Medicare.
Right.
And yet, but do they really care about Medicaid patients? Well, I think maybe it's possible that they thought, well, we don't really care about Medicaid patients. And then they were like, well, actually, a lot of children out there are,
Oh, the reason that payment pause, that broad freeze, stopped is because Republican members of Congress got really antsy when they shut off the Medicaid portal for the states, and they
Mhm.
started screaming, and that's when it stopped. Now, what we're learning is when you turn things off and turn them back on again, it's not so easy in the federal government. We're hearing about a lot of Head Start programs, community health centers, things like that that aren't getting their money, even though there are two temporary restraining orders against that OMB memo that said pause all grants and loans, and the OMB has rescinded that memo. But people still aren't getting the money, and because these grantees operate in a very hand to mouth kind of way, those community health centers are shutting down.
Yeah,
Head Start programs are shutting down. All of these things, very catastrophic
it
things,
is
are
almost
happening, and it's just
impossible.
from the on and off switch.
It's almost impossible for, I mean, we learned this with the Change Healthcare outage anyway.
Yes.
Physician practices, they're running on extremely, extremely slim margins.
Right.
And if their funding gets shut down, they don't have, especially, when you're hiring, when you're employing doctors, and nurse practitioners, and labor that's pretty expensive. You don't have more than, a couple weeks,
Yeah.
of cash on hand,
And it's
at
even that's
best.
even more true when it's a
If you
federal
are
grant funded program.
if
Because
you
if
are yeah
yeah,
if
go
you
ahead.
are actually treating Medicaid patients,
Yeah.
um forget about it, because those that
Right.
the reimbursement rates for Medicaid are, unbelievably low. So, if you're not doing fraud, which a lot of a lot of
Right.
Medicaid
Right.
providers are, um and again, that is also a very lucrative. So these Republican congressmen are not only getting, um pushback from constituents. Obviously, they're going to be getting pushback from big private equity owned roll-ups of, whatever, group homes, or, anything that's,
Right.
that Medicaid. Most Medicaid patients are on managed Medicaid plans that give a
Right.
lot of money to, Centene and other kinds of HMOs. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to make this quick point, and then I want to go to the comments a little bit, and then I want to get to Alex Jones because that was the other big story you
Oh,
did
right.
this week.
uh,
So yeah, you almost forgot, right? Just quickly, like it's especially true in the case of federally grant funded programs, because there's this assumption that if you're a community health center and you're funded by the federal government, you just get a lump sum of that money every year and you put it in your bank account. That's not how it works. If you want to pay payroll, you have to ping the system. I want to draw down my grant to make payroll for this week. And then the Treasury, Bureau of the Fiscal Service, pays that out. So if those are cut off for even a day or a few days, and it coincides with when you have to pay rent or when you have to make payroll, then you're in big, big trouble. And that's what we're seeing in these areas where the payments haven't been switched back on yet. So it's a really catastrophic situation, much more so than just sort of a normal kind of government shutdown or kind of something like that. So we had some comments where people are asking, is a state going to sue? Is a district attorney going to sue over this kind of stuff? Or is there a RICO that could be pursued? We're seeing a lot of lawsuits. They're not coming necessarily from states, although states did sue to stop the payment freeze and were successful in that, at least temporarily, to get a restraining order. But we're seeing tons of lawsuits, and a lot of them are from unions. A lot of them are from federal or advocacy groups who don't want, mass membership organizations who have their individual data within the payment system and are saying this is a violation of the Privacy Act, it's a violation of the IRS statute that says that tax returns can't be given out to individuals who aren't authorized to use them. So there are a ton of lawsuits. And in fact, you were at one of the hearings this week, Mo, the one around the payment system.
It was a telephone hearing.
Oh, it was a telephone thing?
I was listening in.
All right. Well, anyway,
And
but it was interesting, right? I mean, tell us a little bit about that.
well, they had a Justice Department lawyer who was defending, the representing the actions of Krauss and Doge, but it was very clear that he kept going on mute. That was like a thing, and then it would cause a lot of echoing issues, and the judge was, trying to be very patient. Um, he kept changing his story. This Bradley Humphreys is this fellow's name. And it was very clear that he didn't know what these guys were doing, and he was being told, sort of conflicting things. And they settled on a sort of mini, some sort of agreement to not give handover access to anybody else. But he initially kind of claimed that only Krauss and Marco Elez had access to the systems,
Right.
and that it was read only, or maybe it wasn't entirely read only. There was a lot of kind of hedging, a lot of going on mute, and he also said that he wasn't actually with, like, that there was nobody from Doge or the Treasury, representing dissent with him, that he was kind of having to, like, sort of, I don't even know if he was directly speaking to any of these people. So it was weird. It was, and the thing is that, like, I mean, one thing that I wish that the Democrats would do is just establish like a hotline, a clearinghouse for, because this is happening all throughout. There was a report that they were headed to the Department of Labor. That changed from being a sort of in real life confrontation to a Zoom. I'm not sure what was going on, but there was a lot of speculation that they were trying to get at Bureau of Labor statistics. I heard the speculation coming from people who maybe knew, and I also heard, third hand, that the military, senior military officials are getting scared, which, I would be, about what could happen. So the thing is that, like, there's this fear among a lot of folks, that Elon Musk is, obviously they're sort of trying to seize the climate data, that they're going to try and seize the economic data
they're at
to
NOAA,
sort of
they're
reflect, reflect perfect numbers, regardless. And it's interesting because, again, the inspiration here is Javier Milei in Argentina, who has apparently brought inflation down to, like, the low double digits, like 11 or 12% per year from or no, maybe it's like 20%. Maybe I'm giving him too much credit. But the poverty rate is now 53% in Argentina, which is not anybody's idea of a poor country.
Right.
It was 10%. Some years ago they had a wealth tax. They announced they had a very successful, at the time, at least that's how it was reported, sort of amnesty agreement where they told their rich people, listen, if you declare your wealth now, we won't prosecute you. And they uncovered some $450 billion in assets that nobody
Right.
knew was there. So this is clearly, Milei is clearly the result of a long sort of oligarch revolt in Argentina, and we're seeing a lot of his recipe exported here, and it's insane. It's
Yeah, there's some parallels
truly
there.
insane
Yeah.
with the company that,
Okay.
the country that has the reserve currency, and I don't
Yeah.
know. Anyway,
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, I want to get to Alex Jones. One quick comment here in the comments about dueling live streams, the prospect versus the majority report is. Have I declared war on my buddy Sam Cedar? All of these you can see an archive of. We put this up on the site, and you can watch it later, and you can watch majority reports later. So just pick one to check out live, and then watch the other one later. That's the way you can go. These things happen. There are only three networks. CBS and NBC have the same thing on at the same time. Okay. So the other big thing you did this week, Mo, and it was a really spectacular piece about the Alex Jones bankruptcy, which we actually got an update on, just the other day. And I think the point that you made in the story is that Alex Jones is given to seeing conspiracies in everything. But the only thing that he's participating in willingly, where there's an actual conspiracy going on, is the U.S. bankruptcy system and how it protects the powerful at the expense of ordinary people. So why don't you talk about that story and what you're trying to get across?
it's a massive machine. The bankruptcy system in this country has really devolved into a massive machine for depriving citizens of due process, of depriving
Right.
their, private rights of action. And Alex Jones knew about this. He was sort of kind of understood it early on, but I'm sure everyone will recall. It seems so long ago, but back in November, the announcement that the Onion would be taking over the Alex
Yeah.
Jones's free speech systems, the Infowars archive and their website and their YouTube, and it was this little consolation prize, right? There's a lot of sort of resistance liberal type media operations that have very closely watched Alex Jones's legal
Right.
saga over the years. And this was just like, it essentially, but what happened was obviously there were maybe 2 dozen parents of children who were murdered at Sandy Hook, who had sued Alex Jones because he had accused them all of being crisis actors, of trying to perpetrate a hoax engineered to take away their guns. And
Hmm.
a lot of people really believed this very strongly. Alex Jones doubled down on it, tripled down on it many, many times. My old question was always why? Like, why was he doing this in concert with who? It's because it was just so wild, and he's a reckless guy, and it seemed very clear that he was defaming and slandering these people in ways that where they could had a lot um of damages that they could prove. And so, yes, so lo and behold, a few of these families take him to court. Some do it in Texas. Not sure why they chose Texas, but they got a really, the 45 or $55 million jury award. And a bunch of families in Connecticut sued him there, and they got a $1.5 billion jury award. And they
Right.
got that in large part because Alex Jones refused to participate in the discovery process, was constantly in contempt of court. He was in such, visceral contempt of the court that two judges in two states issued death penalty sanctions, which means basically
Yeah.
like, forget about it. You're wrong. You have no leg to stand on. Let's move. We're going to just skip over the whole evidence part and
Right.
move straight to the damages, assessment of the damages. So he decides before these trials go through, he decides to file for bankruptcy. And where does he file? My favorite district, Southern District of Texas. He actually filed in this mini jurisdiction, Victoria, Texas,
Yeah, this little town.
where the only judge, I think, who looks at cases there is this gentleman, Chris Lopez. Chris Lopez has been a kind of bête noire of mine for a while. If you follow bankruptcy at all, or if you follow, the Wall Street Journal, you'll know that there was a huge scandal that led to the resignation of the kind of most famous and most prolific bankruptcy judge in America, a fellow named David Jones. And Chris Lopez is sort of Jones's protege. But unlike
Right.
Jones, who did something extremely stupid, which was basically be the live-in boyfriend of of a law partner at that was had
Had a
dozens
lot
of
of cases
cases
before
in
him.
his
Yeah.
court.
Yeah.
um and it was sort of this big corruption racket. Lopez isn't outwardly conspicuously corrupt that way. He's just sort of a pushover. He actually said in a hearing at one point, like, I'm not a layup, but like that's like basically his reputation.
It's like
Um,
your protestations that your T-shirt that says "I am not a layup" is raising questions answered by the T-shirt kind of thing. Yeah,
exactly. And
yeah,
so, Lopez presided over the bankruptcy of Steward, the Steward hospital system. Steward is a criminal Ponzi scheme front to back. There's so many disgusting things that went on with this hospital chain. I could go on and on. But Lopez sort of treated it like he treated this hospital Ponzi scheme with deference. Clearly, avoided reading any of the
yeah,
newspaper articles about it,
yeah,
and denied any motion to appoint a tort committee. That denied any of the motions that might have sort of uncovered what the fraud was, or given some justice to the many, 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 many people who were harmed by this hospital chain. And that's basically how all his cases go.
right,
In the case of Alex Jones, what was interesting was that he initially had thrown out a few of Alex Jones's bankruptcy uh, petitions, because it was a
right.
bad faith bankruptcy. But all the bankruptcies in SDTX are bad faith, if you ask me. Um, and he had thrown out some of Alex Jones's bankruptcy, and the Sandy Hook families had a lot of really high-powered lawyers on their side. Brad Karp, who's like a
Right.
big law luminary. He's Alex Leon Black's lawyer, Citigroup's lawyer. Brad Karp got behind the Sandy Hook families,
Right.
and a
So this is
lot of other.
funny. Yeah, that was a funny part of the story where it's like, you know, you're kind of intimating that Lopez instinctively runs towards power, right? And
Right.
he's like, "Oh wait, there's power on the side of the Sandy Hook guys, but Alex Jones is the bankruptcy, he's the
Yeah,
company and I'm
he's the
supposed to
debtor.
go towards the company, the
And I
debtors."
really think that, like, he sensed the vibe shift, right? Like that. And
Yeah,
at a certain point, Elon Musk, or X filed a motion
that's right.
in the bankruptcy, and there was a lot of theorizing that X was going to, like, bail out uh Alex Jones's company at the last minute. But whatever it was, by the time he was ruling on it, it shouldn't have been up to Christopher Lopez. He last summer converted the case into a Chapter 7. When a case gets converted to a Chapter 7, you appoint a trustee in charge of disposing of all the assets and reconciling it. And Lopez almost never converts anything to a Chapter 7, but
Right.
he did in the case of Alex Jones because he's such a uniquely horrific character. So the trustee goes in and he says, okay, obviously this guy's creditors are these families. What do these families want to do, with these assets? And the family said, hey, give him to the Onion and we will provide a credit bid, since Alex Jones owes us, like $1.7 billion
Right.
dollars. Like, we'll give over our credit, and in order to subsidize this bid of the Onion.
Right.
And the trustee said, okay, well, that's cool. There was another insider bidder, but they didn't really have that much money, and they didn't want to put up
Right.
any more than $3 million. So really it should have been, sort of a rubber stamp case, because the trustee, this is
Everybody
what
wanted it. Yeah.
trustee is
And
supposed to
yeah.
do. Instead, Lopez decides he's very uncomfortable with this deal, that it just offends his sensibilities. He goes off on like all of these random tangents, and then tells them to come back in a month. Um, in then this week, basically the trustee had formed an agreement, because there was a little bit of like random conflict between the Texas families and the Connecticut families. They sorted that out, and he did a hearing on Wednesday, and basically said no, no, cash is
Yeah.
the only thing,
And this
essentially
was
saying.
the key is this was supposed to be an evidentiary hearing that was going to take all day. And you
Mhm.
told me you got on like 20, 30 minutes late and it was already over
Yeah, it was over. I
because
thought that
he didn't
he
even
had
look, he didn't take any evidence. He didn't look at anything. He's just like, nope, this is what I want to do. Cash only. I'm blowing up the settlement and tough luck. That's it.
And
Total
the other
win
funny thing is
for
that, like,
Trump.
usually this court puts its audio files of its hearings online, but they stopped putting anything on the Alex Jones hearings online. And I tried to get them, and they were like, "Well, if you fax over this form, we can send you a CD." And I'm like, a
What?
CD? Like, it's
What?
this is supposed to be, the like, 21st century. I mean,
The
this court
People's
is like a
Court. Yeah.
well-oiled machine. So it was, but it was just kind of like this. So the story touches on a ton of bankruptcies that have gone on in Lopez's court. It
Right.
also touches on the recent, revelations about the New Orleans Saints, doing PR
Yeah.
for the Catholic Church, because the Archdiocese of New Orleans also
Right.
filed for bankruptcy, not in SCTX, but the bankruptcy judge there is like another protege of David Jones. So it's
Yeah.
just a wild story of lawlessness in America, and how, under the Trump administration, I only expect that to to double down.
Yeah.
And yeah, sad.
It's a crazy story. You can check it out at prospect.org. Um, uh, it's it speaks, and I like sort of the illusion, with an A, illusions that you make about, this is the real deep state. This is the real crisis. These are the real crisis actors. These are the real fake. This is the real hoax that's being perpetrated on the American people, and it's not something you'd ever hear on Infowars.
Right. Like, it's that, well, that was just the thing, is that, like, that kept coming back to me, is that um the unifying quality that all of these bankruptcies have. Because what a lot of this is these bankruptcies are also the Texas two steps, where a company, has been poisoning people, and so it breaks off, a little piece of itself that's involved in the poisoning, and says, okay, this part of our company is going to go bankrupt, and we're going to give them $3 million to pay off the settlements, and like, and exploit the bankruptcy code to basically deprive all of these plaintiffs of their right to, due process, a right to a trial, in front of a jury of their peers, and and that's what's happened to all of these, people in New Orleans who've been, molested by priests. I mean, everybody is getting in on this, and but like, the thing that unifies all of these bankruptcies is that they're all fake. Like, they're
Right.
in bad faith. Either the company is so woefully insolvent that there's nothing to reorganize, or the company is not insolvent at all, and they're just
Right.
creating this like mirage of insolvency, in
or,
order to
or in
get
some
all of the
cases they're not
privileges.
even a company, as you say.
Yes. Right.
That
Yes.
they are sort of a structured sort of series of claims that have been turned into a company for
Right.
the purposes of extinguishing those claims.
And Alex Jones did that. I mean, he initially tried to file, through like three subsidiaries that nobody had ever heard of, that didn't actually have any, like, business purpose. His strategy, and he did this starting in 2022, and he was pretty, it was pretty savvy. He had some shrewd lawyers working for him. But and of course they got what they wanted. But again, I think that if it probably would have been a different story, if Trump had not won, because I think
Right.
that, like, Lopez sort of is this, you know wonderful vessel for understanding who in a room like has the most money and
Right.
power.
And power.
And
Yeah, absolutely.
that
That's what's
dynamic
so
shifted.
interesting about it. Yeah, totally. Totally. Okay, great. Well, we are out of time. Thank you so much for your work this week and always, Mo Tkacik, and go birds.
Oh, go birds. Yes. I don't think the deep state wants the birds to win. I think they've been
No.
dehumanizing Eagles fans, but
We shall see.
maybe we'll get a miracle.
Well, look, I mean, it's just fun to be a third time in 8 years, I think. So anyway, we'll check that out. We'll have more for you next week, and we'll put this on the site. As always, go to prospect.org. We are doing daily coverage of all the madness that is happening, and